All right, I'm gonna start. Gonna introduce everyone, and I think everybody knows so far on this call who I am, but just for the recording's sake, that we are gonna share, I'm Ariel Morris, and I'm the Family Resource Specialist with Early Hearing Detection and Intervention with Parent Information Center of Delaware. And I support families with children and youth who are diagnosed with hearing loss. I have a couple quick mentions that a survey will be emailed out to our attendees after this is over. So if you could take a moment to fill it out, I would greatly appreciate it. And we have two ASL interpreters tonight, Sarah and Carrie. Sarah is going to be interpreting first if you need to pin her, and we also have closed captioning available. And then we'll be taking questions at the end. So if you want to unmute to ask a question, or you can put something in the chat and then I can read it off. So now our speakers, Dr. Shanda Brashears is a pediatric audiologist at Nemours since 2005. She has her bachelor in music therapy from Loyola University and a master's degree in communication disorders from Louisiana State University Medical School. She received her AUD from the Central Michigan University Vanderbilt Distance Learning program in 2006. And then we have Bernadette Iuliucci, who is the itinerant teacher of the deaf for Delaware State Programs for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, Deaf-Blind Outreach Department. She has been a teacher of the deaf for over 25 years in a variety of settings and serving students using a range of communication options. She has her master's in deaf education from McDaniel College, and she is also an RID nationally certified ASL English interpreter. Okay, so now I'm going to pass it off to them and let them begin their presentation. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, everyone. We shall get started on classroom acoustics and remote technology. Acoustics from science class, the properties or qualities of a room or building that determine how sound is transmitted. And sound travels in waves, like we all learned in science. And those waves, when they hit surfaces that are hard, they will bounce off. Not unlike a bouncy ball or in a pinball machine. And so we need to figure out how to work with acoustics and technology and help our students get the best access they can. We're all here because we love our deaf and hard of hearing kids. They're our passion. It's why we get up in the morning. And we know that there are barriers and limits to their access from the time their hearing loss is found, before it's found. Whether they're at a playmate's house and missing language during playtime, or they are watching Elmo and they're not accessing all the language that Elmo is saying, or they're at the dinner table with their family and only catching pieces of the conversation, where they're going on vacation, or maybe there's a relative that's sick. There's always pieces, little pieces missing throughout their lives, and we need to combat that. My favorite conversations are those hard ones once you get up to puberty. And I know that those are really difficult conversations for parents to have. So I'm sure with limited access to the communication, add in the hard conversations, and our students are just not getting all the information. This is a Familiar Sounds audiogram. And on it, you can see it's not a full one. I just cut the part where it has the alphabet, and that's where we hear the sounds. Students that have I say just a moderate loss, can be missing some or all of the sounds. So during a conversation, if you don't hear all the sounds, there's pieces of that puzzle missing. There's a great puzzle story that Karen Anderson did that is a great visual of how students with a hearing loss are just not getting the whole picture. So I thought it was interesting, only at a moderate loss, that it's the whole alphabet. Students could be missing the whole alphabet.
So the reason that we need to have good classroom acoustics and in many cases technology to help put the teacher's voice into the student's ear is because the idea is we need to improve the signal to noise ratio. You might see it in some of our reports from Nemours as SNR, signal to noise ratio. That is how much louder the signal that the child is trying to hear, the target signal, is above the background noise. A normal hearing listener needs a signal to noise ratio of 5 to 10 decibels to understand a conversation in its entirety without missing anything. Classroom noise can range from 50 to 95 decibels. Hopefully there is no instruction going on when the room is at 95 decibels, but we've all been to very loud classrooms and cafeterias and gymnasiums. A person's voice is typically in the range of 50 to 70 decibels. If you shout, if you holler, you can maybe get up to 75, 80, but it's really not humanly possible to get louder than that. And of course, we don't want to be shouting at our students. And like Bernadette mentioned, reverberation is very prevalent in classrooms. There are too many hard surfaces, and we'll talk a little bit more about what modifications can occur to a classroom to have surfaces that absorb rather than reflect the sound. When you speak, you hear your own voice at the time that you speak, and then depending on the room that you're in, you're going to also hear those same sounds coming back to you. And depending on where you are in the room, the sounds are going to hit your ears at different times. Same sound could hit your ear several times. This muddies up the signal, making it difficult to understand speech and noise, and can be very confusing. There is also a disruption in localization, so it's difficult to tell where a sound is coming from when it's presented in a lot of background noise. And our auditory brains have something called squelch, and that's actually the term, the scientific term that we use in audiology for the brain's ability to focus in on the person that you're trying to listen to and ignore the background noise. Hearing impaired individuals typically do not have as good of an ability to squelch background noise. If the hearing loss is sensory neural, that will affect this ability more so than a conductive loss. And a neural loss, such as auditory neuropathy, will leave a person with very little ability to squelch background noise. And in the classroom, of course, listening effort is very important. So imagine that your brain is spending a lot of its energy just trying to fill in the gaps and figure out what is being said. That leaves less mental capacity to be able to understand the material, to continuously maintain your auditory focus on the material, and to recall and remember the material. So, and then we know that loud classrooms can lead to kids tuning out. It's too hard to follow what's being said, so I give up. Or bad behavior, which, you know, doesn't only disrupt the learning of the child who's acting out, but all of the students around them. And vocal strain is another big part of what teachers have to deal with in noisy classrooms, and that, you know, their vocal cords can become strained or even give out entirely. And the frustration of trying to be heard, it can lead to a lot of burnout in the profession. So we've kind of broken up the hearing impaired body of students into three main categories. There's those with mild or minimal hearing loss, unilateral hearing loss, or single-sided deafness, oftentimes these students don't wear any technology. Sometimes the only accommodation for them in the classroom is preferential seating, if that. Then we have our students that wear behind the ear hearing aids. In the ear hearing aids are not very common in the pediatric population. Bone anchored hearing aids, which I have an example of what that looks like. Here's my blurred background. Nope, the Baha bone anchored hearing aid for kids with conductive hearing losses who can't wear traditional behind the ear hearing aids. When they are put into the classroom without a remote microphone, there are challenges. Of course, they're going to do better than if they had no technology at all, but not having the teacher's voice go directly into their ears is a real challenge for a hearing impaired child, even while they're wearing their technology, because of the poor signal to noise ratio. And then we've got our kids who are wearing amplification in the form of hearing aids or cochlear implants, and also have remote microphones that are paired to the device. So for the first group, kids with minimal hearing loss or unilateral hearing loss, oftentimes a Soundfield system is the best way to go. If they don't have their own hearing aids, then there's nothing to pair the remote microphone to. So placing a student like that in academic classrooms with a Soundfield system is usually the best option. And we have a little note here just so that you guys are aware. Traditional FM is sort of migrating now to a technology called 2.4 gigahertz. We still refer to it as FM, but the 2.4 is just a way to get the signal from the transmitter to the receiver. And that is what a lot of modern FM systems are actually using these days. So we want to talk about the pros and cons of using a Soundfield system.
So I thought I'd be able to write on the PowerPoint as we were talking, and I'm afraid that's not going to work. So I still want to talk about it. And one thing that I want to note from the bottom pictures is when you hear Soundfield, you think field, like around you. But like that first picture, there's numerous speakers throughout that classroom. But what typically happens is there's a red cat or there's a tower and it's just one speaker in that area. So class participation, I would love it if a bunch of people could tell me some pros and cons. We'll have a brief discussion, what's good, what's bad, and I will fill in this slide before it is shared to everyone. Pros, cons to a Soundfield. No class participants. You can also write in the chat if you'd like to write in the chat.
I was going to say for the Soundfield, I would think the pros to a Soundfield system and also convincing when you're talking to a school might be it would benefit everybody in the classroom, not just that child, but everybody that is there.
And for preteens and teenage students, they also like not being singled out. Some kids, when they get to around middle school, no longer want to use their personal FM system because they don't like the fact that it's them making the teacher wear the microphone and they feel embarrassed in front of the class. So it's definitely Soundfield is better than no FM. And a lot of these teens will not use a personal FM.
Anyone else? All right, I'll share some of the cons. To get the max benefit, you need to be close to it. So depending on where it is in the classroom and the setup, that could be a little bit tricky. If it's mounted to the wall, also a con because you can't take it with you. Some of the portable Soundfield speakers are, like you can take them from class to class, but like you had just said, there are students that don't want that attention to have that on their desk. Anything else you guys can think of?
Can I add? Oh, I was just going to say that classrooms are really busy places and kids move around a lot, even in elementary classrooms. So once you get just a few feet from whatever the speaker is, then the efficacy of that really drops off to the point where it's not really effective at all. It sounds more effective to someone who doesn't have a hearing loss because it's louder, but it doesn't really do what it's supposed to do if the kids are moving through sections of the classroom and the speaker is someplace else.
Definitely. Also, the Soundfield system does not address the issue of reverberation at all. But then on the other side, I'll give it a pro of the teacher is aware of the signal coming out of the microphone. And I say that because I hear funny stories from students all the time who tell me the conversation that they heard between their teacher and another teacher because they went out in the hall to have a conversation and they didn't hit mute on their microphone. And the kid is getting a whole earful of it. So with the Soundfield system, teachers typically, they hear their voice coming out of the speaker and they remember to mute it when it's appropriate.
I have one story related to a teacher had a necklace on and she didn't take it off and it just clanged against the mic and it just came out through the speaker. And all of the students were like, what is happening? And the teacher was the last to realize her impact through that speaker. All right, thanks for the participants. Let's move on.
All right, so we've got our kiddos that are in technology and don't have an FM system. I brought just a few little examples of some kind of standard hearing aids. Lots of different sizes of hearing aids. We have them with molds and with just little slim tubes and a dome. But we've got kids that are wearing behind the ear hearing aids, bone anchored hearing aids on soft bands, or the Sound Arc. Maybe some of you guys have never seen that. It's a little way to wear the device sort of around the base of the neck, pushing the devices up to the mastoid bone. And then at 7 years old and older, there are implantable options for either a magnet or a titanium abutment that you can use to put the bone anchored hearing aid directly onto the mastoid bone. And then of course we've got our cochlear implant kiddos. So it kind of alluded to some of the pros and cons of this, but if anybody else would like to take a stab at it, please do. That is technology without the remote microphone.
So it's definitely more portable. It's definitely more portable. So that's good. It's smaller in size.
The main con is that you haven't made up the signal to noise ratio, and hearing aids are notoriously not great for helping with localization cues. They don't help with that binaural squelch of the background noise. So, you know, preferential seating with hearing aids or a cochlear implant alone is okay, but our preference is always to also provide a remote microphone whenever possible. So we have a question. How does the student have access when technology or hearing aid fails? Well, they don't for a while until they can get back online. So back in the time of regular batteries and hearing aids, we always try to make sure that either the school nurse or an older student would have spare batteries. You know, if the teacher can learn a little bit about troubleshooting, is the mold just plugged up with wax or what's going on with the hearing aid, that's ideal. But you know, it's very important for students to have self-advocacy. A lot of times they're sitting in class without any technology that's working because they feel embarrassed or just don't know how to ask for help with that. You know, if there's itinerant teachers of the deaf and educational audiologists roaming about the building, they will have more of a resource, but we know there's just not that many of those that are working in the state of Delaware. So yeah, that is a problem. Intermittent working of equipment is a definite issue.
And I'm just going to chime in here. So we know that every student with a hearing loss is that student with their own level of loss, their own experience. And just because they have technology, it does not make them hearing. So we use different accommodations in the classroom to balance that out. And those accommodations should be used at all times because we don't know what they're accessing all day, every day. So when the equipment fails, those accommodations, those visuals, those check-ins, we'll talk a lot. We'll talk more in the end about accommodations more, but you're going to definitely increase those accommodations to balance out the loss to the auditory access that those students have.
And both the hearing aids and the FM receiver come with an indicator light that does have to be enabled in the programming, but the teachers should be aware that, at least for younger students, that they can look for a light that's blinking on every 2 to 3 seconds to ensure that the instrument is on and working.
The concern, a negative con here, is students don't want to pass the mic from teacher to teacher, especially in the middle school and high school levels. If it's not ingrained in those students that this is a benefit, it's a struggle. It really is a struggle. It makes the students stand out and they don't always care that it's beneficial. It's definitely a con.
Yeah.
The pro is it gives you the best access. All right, let's move.
Improves that signal to noise ratio.
Okay. Let's try this.
Mhm.
Can you see the video? Can you see you can?
Yep.
So I see the interpreter. Could everyone access that?
Just reading the subtitles.
Yeah, I couldn't hear, but I could read the subtitles as well.
Okay, the link will be in the slides. It basically shows you how just using the hearing aids, everything's amplified, instruction is difficult to access. You put on that remote mic and there's focus to the instruction and the language of instruction. And now I have to go back to the screen.
All right, so I just wanted to talk about some of the equipment, the actual equipment that you'll find in the schools. The touchscreen mic is kind of the workhorse of what's most commonly used in classrooms around here. It has some indicators to the teacher that the signal is strong and that the system is working and getting to the hearing aids. It also has team teaching capability, which we'll mention a little bit more on later. The multimedia hub is intended for when there is a lot of instruction that is multimedia, like from the whiteboard, from a computer. It's a little bit easier to go from one device to another as far as what you're transmitting from. with the hub. And then the Roger pass around is a good microphone for team teaching, probably some college level classes where there's some, you know, a lot of discussion and students are participating in the learning experience. The receiver, this is an example of a receiver shoe that will plug into the bottom of a hearing aid. That is kind of becoming a little bit antiquated, but they're still available. It's a physical receiver that receives the signal coming from the transmitter. And then I wanted to mention the cross. We mentioned single-sided deafness before, and what a cross system does is the user wears two instruments, both just look like conventional hearing aids, but one is actually just a transmitter. It's collecting sound. Let's say this is the deaf side, collecting sound from this, what's hitting this ear, and then wirelessly transmitting it with like hardly any delay to the good ear, which has a hearing aid and is receiving just a tiny bit of gain to make up for the dome in the ear. And it gives a little bit more of a 360 awareness of sound, slightly better localization than without. And I wanted to mention it when talking about FM because traditionally a child that wears a cross system, when the FM transmitter is turned on and connected to the instrument on the good ear, the cross functionality would stop. The system was not able to handle both at the same time. And where there's some brand new technology out now where you can get the cross capability while also receiving the FM transmitted signal. So, you know, ideally, one of the reasons we're all here is because when clinical audiologists and educational audiologists and teachers of the deaf work together, that absolutely provides the best outcome for our students. So, if any of you are working with a student, you're always welcome to reach out to me. My email is floating out there, and I think it's also at the end of this presentation, but we have a common student. It's always best if we touch base and work for what's best for that student together. For the team teaching, well, this is to make the point that, you know, when we work together with our colleagues in the schools, it's easier to pick equipment that would best suit their educational needs, such as a child who's going to be in one or more classrooms with a lot of team teaching. The Phonak touch screen, you do have to have two with two teachers, but it just very seamlessly goes back and forth. The teachers can kind of even talk over each other and the child's getting the signal at the same time. Whereas if you have two Edge-A-Mics by Oticon, there's a little bit of a delay when you're switching from one speaker to another. All of the Oticon and Phonak, and I'm mentioning those because those are really the two manufacturers that we use, and Nemours is fitting technology to just about every student in Delaware. But each of those manufacturers' transmitters are compatible with any hearing aid. However, there is a little bit more workaround that has to happen if you're going Phonak to Oticon or Phonak to Resound or whatever it is. Sometimes there is a neck loop or an audio shoe or some other piece of equipment, or at least the know-how to pair across manufacturers. And of course, when there's not a TOD or educational audiologist on hand at many schools in our state, it can be very challenging for families and teachers to figure out how to cross over with the manufacturers. I do think most of my colleagues and I at Nemours really prefer Oticon a lot for a lot of different reasons that if anybody wants to reach out to me and I can tell them to you offline. But you know, the schools for the most part seem to use Phonak. So it's kind of like an ongoing challenge that we have as working across the manufacturers. We mentioned the multimedia hub. It's really not necessary because both transmitters come with a hardwired, just 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch plug. So if you need to plug the transmitter into a computer or whatever else, you can generally do that just by hardwiring it. And for the past several years, we've had the genius invention of the Phonak Roger Direct, which is a little programming device that you can lay a hearing aid on top of and essentially put a license for an FM receiver into the hearing aid. So kids like it better because they don't have a big bulky piece. The receiver is not making their hearing aid bigger. It's convenient for schools in that if they have a student that's moving on to a different school or graduating, they take the license for that receiver off of the child's hearing aids. They still own that receiver, and can then use it for another student. I have heard a lot of horror stories about hearing aids coming back from repair or getting lost, and the receiver's lost, and then the school is on the hook for the cost of that. So it's not an ideal situation, but a technological advancement anyway. And then a lot of you are probably aware that Bluetooth remote microphones have become pretty ubiquitous. Since they came out, both Oticon and Phonak have been offering a free Bluetooth microphone with every hearing aid order. So a lot of kids are out there owning them, not that many out there using them. We do counsel kids that they should use their Bluetooth remote microphone for long car trips when they're in the third row, sporting events, noisy restaurants, those types of things, and that they should be using a more traditional FM system with a educational transmitter for in the classroom. I would say that if a child does not have access to FM, the Bluetooth microphone is absolutely better than not having a remote microphone. However, the remote microphones don't have the warning, like the different kind of indicators to the teacher of how the device is performing. And generally the quality and clarity, stability is thought to be not quite as good. They're a lot less expensive. This is the Phonak partner mic, a little blurry there. And this is the Oticon Edgy mic. So they're nice and small, and you can just clip it to the top of your shirt or wear it on a lanyard. It is important if you're working with teachers to make sure they know not to wear the long lanyard with the device like down by their belly. You want it close to the face so you're getting that nice strong signal to noise ratio.
And we just heard the other day that supposedly they're trying to integrate the receiver so we don't have to have those transfer issues. I am hoping that the receivers just come in all the hearing aids. It's really difficult and it's not necessary, in my opinion.
These are just some examples of other snazzy transmitter devices. Phonak's got a lot of them. The clip-on mic, I think, yeah, the clip-on mic and the partner mic are really similar. It's just a very basic device. The Roger On has a little bit more capability to zoom in to, you kind of point it at the sound you're trying to focus in on. And then the Roger Select, I think, would really be a slam dunk for a lot of middle-aged and older normal or near normal hearing people, because the idea is that you set it on the table and it amplifies the area around you. So perfect for a restaurant. So if you're trying to hear everybody at the table, but not everybody in the whole restaurant, you place the Roger Select down on the table. And then the Connect clip, should mention that all the Bluetooth devices are, in addition to having the remote microphone capability, they also allow a child to stream. And of course, they love that. I think the kids that are using their Bluetooth microphones are using it more for streaming than for remote microphone purposes. But you can stream now to most hearing aids directly from a smartphone, as long as it's newish. But the Connect clip would allow you to connect to a Bluetooth television, a laptop, an iPad, any kind of tablet. So, kind of opening up the world. Not that kids need any more screen time, but if they're doing it, they can have the signal go directly to their hearing aids. And then I just wanted you guys to be aware that there are ways to verify the functionality of the remote microphone, whichever type that it is, in the clinic. In a sound booth, we can present a multi-talker babble that is just a recording of like kind of cocktail party noise presented behind the student, and then in front of the student would be a signal coming from the remote microphone, which is on the other side, the tester side of the sound booth. And we can present either live or recorded speech into that device and make sure that the child is getting really good speech understanding, even in the presence of, moderate to loud background noise. And then we can also use a probe microphone measurement. This isn't done very often, but sometimes if there's some kind of question about how the equipment is working, if it's not working properly, maybe needs to be sent in for repair. The probe microphone just on the bottom right, it's just a little plastic tube that goes very close to the eardrum, kind of hold it in place and then put the hearing aid on top of it so that the output of the hearing aid is just before the end of the microphone. And then you can put the signal of what's coming through the remote microphone in a test box and then measure the output of what's coming through that device directly in the child's ear canal. And it's probably good for you guys to be aware that we are more and more, I would say, fitting normal hearing kids with technology specifically so they have access to a remote microphone. We have a pretty robust auditory processing program at Nemours, and more for the auditory processing group, but also somewhat for ADHD. Some kids, if they meet the criteria, are being fit with basically hearing aids with a remote microphone in order to get that better signal to noise ratio in the classroom. So Oticon has the Amigo Star that is specifically for normal hearing kids. You would have a hard time putting a lot of gain into that for a hearing impaired child. And Phonak similarly has the Focus. So for these devices, at least the last generation, I think this might be changing, but there is a neck loop that is actually receiving the signal from the transmitter and then communicating with the hearing aids in order to keep the cost down of the system so that you don't have integrated FM for these normal hearing kids. But, does a normal hearing kid want to wear 2 hearing aids with a neck loop? Not usually, but we do have some auditory processing kids who have kind of turned around their academics because they were willing to use it. And it's giving them that much needed signal to noise ratio benefit in the classroom.
So we've situated the equipment. What do we do? Ask for help. That's what we need to do. We need to ask for help. So I added some apps here. I'm obsessed with the apps and testing sounds because earlier we were like, teachers talking about 60 dB level, and sometimes the students can get really loud. I'm fascinated. I've been in classrooms where it's been 80 decibels, and I'm like, how is anyone hearing anything? So it's just a fun place to test out different environments in the schools. One thing that I do when I go and observe. The other thing is, so Shanda explained that in the booth, a very pristine, no issues, soundproof booth, she can get, some test scores. Well, another thing we can do is called a functional listening evaluation. And I do that, other people do that in the schools. And we get to see the difference, distance, visuals, noise versus quiet, and how they can impact a student's access to the information. So if you look at this chart and you see the different percentages, it's clear, even for my kid who I tortured and did this test the other day. But when you increase that distance from a speaker, or you increase the noise in the classroom, or you don't have a visual, your percentages of comprehension of words goes away. If you're missing words and parts of the sentences, your concept level is diminishing. So this is a tool that also helps us figure out how the students are doing in the classroom, real life, real noise, real visuals or not visuals. If the teacher's standing in the front of the room talking, great, fantastic. And then they start to walk around the room, our students lose that visual. And for some, it has a severe impact. Some other tools, all these fun, colorful pictures, are pieces and panels that you can add to walls. These are super pretty. They did lots of like designs, but those panels absorb the sound. So all those sharp edges where the sound bounces off can now be absorbed. Again, super fun, colorful. They range in price. I tried to get us a discount. No one would talk to me about it. Some other things, we all know about the tennis balls on the legs of the tables and the chairs. Old school. Now they have fancy little socks like kitty cats, but rugs you can add. The rugs absorb the sound. There are panels you can put on the ceilings. A ton of examples, and the price ranges vary. So we want to recognize the impacts of what happens to our students and how they are missing information, often incidental language from these things. And that's how our students learn. That's how we find out that grandmom's in the hospital, or I had this whole script about new middle school slang, like skivvy toilet. I'm sorry, interpreter. Or Ohio. W is a win. I feel like that's a pretty easy one. But if the students are missing that incidental language, that's going to have not only an impact on their academics, but also an impact on their social lives. I was so excited. My kids would be so embarrassed if they heard me saying those words. So back to the slide. These are all the things, some of the things that can impact the student's access. Things this school can do, things that the teachers can do. We can add in those panels. We can put socks on the chairs. We can close the door if it's during change of classes. The HVACs, there's one school I go into and I'm shocked. There is constant hum and it's up in the ceiling. So like it's already covered by like the ceiling panels, constant hum. And then these behaviors on the right sometimes are in 504s or listed as accommodations. Whoever asked the question in the beginning about what if the equipment doesn't work? With equipment, without equipment, our students will never be hearing. Doesn't matter. You can put a mic on, you can put a cochlear implant, you can put whatever you want to put on the student. They will not be hearing. How do we balance that out? Yep. We try to fix the acoustics in the room. We give them the equipment best for educational environments. And then we need to add things like visuals. For a student to watch, look down, take notes, look back up, find the speaker, understand what's happening. It's a lot. It is exhausting just for me to talk about it. I can't even imagine our students and the work that they're doing. Somewhere on the list, it could say listening fatigue break, because it's work, constant work. Sound is coming in the ears. They have to figure out and process the language that they're hearing. Oftentimes vocabulary needs to be repeated, right? Sometimes the students on the opposite side of the room, they don't have a microphone and they're a low talker. We want those teachers to be repeating those questions, and that vocabulary on the list is repetition. Super important for our students. Closed captioning is a visual, but I always put it separate. I'm a fan of all the time. Everything you can possibly do, I have it on my computer. Captioning everything, it's not 100%. It's definitely not 100%, but it's a support. It's a visual support. And I don't believe you need to have a reading level in order to be exposed to the language. So I'm a huge fan of closed captioning. And if you always have it on, you're not specifically having it for the deaf and hard of hearing student. You're benefiting the entire class. Noise, like I said, some classrooms are crazy loud. Some teachers put on music. That could be difficult for a student to try to hear the music or focus on what they're doing with that music in the background. It could be difficult. We want to pause so our students can identify who's speaking. That often, for me, relates to strategic seating. Front and center is old school front and center. We want our students to be able to access visually the room, to know who's speaking, because like that chart in the functional listening evaluation, they use the visuals as cues. So I would never support solely lip reading as a means to language, but it's important. Facial expression is important. So our students need good visuals, good strategic seating. What am I missing? Pause to identify a speaker, a little prompt. Daily check-ins for all that assistive technology we're using. Don't ask the students if they can hear you. They will yes you all the time. Use an open-ended question. Can you get the lights? Is number 3... Fill in number 3. Tell me the answer to number 3. Those kinds of open-ended questions. Oh, and look, I have visuals on the list twice and bold. Visuals are huge and important. Emergency processes are also something that needs to be in print. An emergency happens, either there's loud alarm on or you're in the classroom needing to do different procedures. Our students need a visual for support in the classroom. 2 questions I had at the end, we're getting there. Number 1, name a tool that you think your schools should do. I won't force you guys to do that. It's a super quiet group. My concern is, how do we get the families, and I know there's a couple parents on here, to go home and use the personal microphones that the students sometimes get with their hearing aids? We need buy-in. We need the students to understand that it's a benefit for them. Oftentimes parents are like, what? I have a microphone. I didn't even know. So that's my concern. How do we improve that knowledge of the microphone and how the students can benefit from it? And how do we get the students to realize they benefit from it, so that in the classroom, it's about their access more than, and learning more than having a piece of equipment? I will let you think about that for 1 second. And if anyone has an answer, please share.
I will say with my daughter, Maddie, who has bilateral cochlear implants, initially it was hard to get her to use her personal mic, her mini mic, but when she actually realized that it was beneficial to her in school, and then now she plays soccer and it's hard for her to hear the coach without it, stuff like that, when she actually advocated for it. So I think the initial want is hard, right? But once they get there and they realize the access is better, I do think they realize and will ask for it more. So I don't really know how to get them to start. We kind of just, forced her and said, this is going to be better for you. But I do think that once they get there, then they'll be happier with it.
Thank you. I've had some students recognize the difference using that functional listening evaluation, looking at the percentages, and they can't repeat a sentence, and they're like, what? So sometimes that helps, but it's difficult. Questions?
What I was just going to say, that whatever you're able to implement with a child, if it's your own child or your student, you got to do it before middle school. You can get some kids to do some things, but getting preteens and teenagers to do stuff like that, they've got to already be in those good habits by the time they turn pre-teenagery, in my experience.
I have to agree with that. I have 2 kids that are bilaterally aided, and they've always used they have the Oticon, so their Connect clip with sports, like Ariel was saying about Maddie. They realized that they needed it with their sports, gymnastics and soccer. And for my son, who's a lot older, he went in, he's like, oh, I don't need it for soccer. And then a really windy day, he realized he really needed it. And that kind of turned things around. And then as he got into middle school and high school, he thought, oh, I don't want to carry it around. And like you both were saying, sometimes that peer pressure, or not wanting to be looked at kind of jumps in there. And as difficult as it was, we kind of just had to have him learn. He's getting older. He needed to kind of try it out. And after a week and after kind of following his grades, we're like, look, you're seeing a difference. You have to understand that you do need this in your classroom, because look at what you're missing. And now he does use it. He went into his freshman year, and I don't know if he just doesn't want me to call the school or if he's doing it on his own. But he is using it now in his classes, because he does find, he told me that, the kids are just so so loud and rowdy sometimes that he can't hear. So he's finding it beneficial to use it. So sometimes they just got to kind of find their own way. And it's really hard to take a step back and not force it as they get older, but it is their hearing loss. It is something that they deal with. I do not. So sometimes giving them a little bit of take the lead, to kind of recognize that need. Well, that's what worked for us anyways. And now he does use it.
Awesome. I compare it to glasses. We would never let our kids who need glasses not wear them. We wouldn't be like, oh, it's fine, just leave it at home. Like just try to read your reading book. It's just a part of who they are. And sometimes it's hard for them to build that confidence when they're little. Some are definitely stronger than others. Sorry, questions?
If only hearing aids were as acceptable as glasses. I use that analogy a lot when I have to convince someone that they need to wear them. Like, it's not that different than, your mom's wearing glasses because she can't see without them. She can't see well without them. It's just, I don't know why hearing aids have such a worse stigma. And I've been hoping that the Bluetooth connectivity and the streaming will take a little bit of the funk off of the perception of hearing aids. I think, I don't know, we're getting there. A lot of people wear ear level headphones, AirPods, whatever, everybody's got something in their ears now. So at some point it should not be such a stigma. We can keep working towards that.
I have a question for you both. Oh, I'm sorry, Pam, you go first.
I'm a new glasses wearer. So just from that perspective, I can tell you that the difference, I think, not having a hearing loss, but between those two things is, without my glasses, I know something is there. It's just not clear enough for me to actually read it, to have value from it, as opposed to a hearing loss. Kids, adults, whoever has no physical access to that sound reliably. So they often don't know what they're missing. So while it's helpful to have that analogy for people who aren't in the field, I think that's part of the hard sell, right? I know that I'm missing something without glasses. Without hearing aids, I might not know that anything is there that I'm even missing in the first place.
And when people hear speech, but they can't understand the speech, they tend to blame the speaker. They don't realize it's that they're missing the consonant sounds. So yeah, I think you're very right about that. You don't know what you don't know.
Thanks, Pam. I just wanted to ask a quick question. You were talking about in the beginning about access to sound in the cafeteria, and how that's very tricky. Do you have any recommendations for that? Because that is one of Maddie's big struggles that she does talk about frequently, and how hard it is to chat with her friends. I mean, it's hard for anybody, even with typical hearing, it's hard in a cafeteria with all these kids and tons of conversations. But I was just wondering if you have any recommendations to make it any sort of better for our deaf and hard of hearing kids.
Bernadette?
I would say her peers can use the mic. Now, if it's like the video that no one could access and hear, it, you know, focuses less on all of the noise and you're more in tune to the speaker's voice. I would also recommend, depending on the students and if they would be willing to go to a quiet place, why not? I feel like that's an absolutely appropriate accommodation because those social connections are so important. Those would be my two suggestions.
I do try to explain to kids how the directional microphone works. It's also not entirely helpful in a cafeteria because you might be talking to the person next to you and in front of you and over there and maybe over here too. But if they understand that that 45-degree azimuth in front of them is going to be a little bit louder than everything on the side and behind, and can get themselves more in the habit of really turning into that cone for each person that they're trying to understand, it might help a little bit. But that is just such a challenging thing. I agree, though, if the school would allow for like a small group, like hearing impaired student and her few friends can go sit somewhere else, that would be fantastic.
That's a great point. I honestly didn't think about that. So yeah, that is a good option if it's available. Thank you. Does
This is-
anybody? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Jennifer. The Roger pen and the I'm blanking on the technology that Shanda showed the picture of.
The Connect clip.
Yeah, the Connect clip and also the one that you sit on the table or you sit on the desk. Those have been used at lunch in the cafeteria before. And in like in the little small group, like I have students who have like there are 4 or 5 girls, and they put that down in the middle, if you will, of the core, you know, the quad, the group of 4 or 5 girls, and it kind of helps with that signal to noise ratio, but I mean, in theory, it does what it's supposed to do, but the cafeteria noise can be so loud that it's still not ideal, but it can be better. So I would suggest trying something like that with is it your daughter or your
Yes.
son? Yeah. Yeah. So you might want to try something like that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Jen. I appreciate it.
Sure.
I know you can do that with the touch screen. Put it in the middle for conference mode.
That's great. Yeah, that's great.
Yep. Same technology, same idea.
It knows if the device is faced this way, it knows to be directional, and if it's laid flat, it knows to be omni in that one area. So yeah, there's a lot more of those floating around the schools than the not the hub, the tabletop. You know, you'd have to buy a separate transmitter for that tabletop device.
Okay.
But the touch screen does have that functionality.
Great. That's awesome.
And
Thank you.
some schools have more than one. And like we were saying before, the touch screen is for team teaching and more than one speaker, just a better tool to use as opposed to the EduMic where you have to wait for disconnect to connect. The touch screen, you can have more than one speaker at a time. I apologize. Our emails are supposed to be there. I'll add them.
Yeah, if you want to put those in the chat, that would be great. And then do we have maybe a minute or two if there's anybody else who does have a question? And if not, you can always email them.
I just have a quick question, just a very quick one. The Rogers Select, is that the flat one that goes on in the middle of the table that picks up on different kinds of conversations?
Yeah,
If
that's its-
so,
Thank you for remembering the name of
Yeah,
it.
yeah, that's its name. Thank you. I couldn't
yeah,
remember. its name.
does Oticon have a version of that?
Not that I know of.
Same.
Because we have used the Oticon Connect clip for that, which I would say kind of the similar thing. We've used it in the center, but if there's something, you know, meant for that, that's a little bit better, I would be interested in hearing about it.
Yeah, I don't think Oticon has something like that. The Edge-a-mic is what we've used.
Yeah, that you might.
And Brandywine, but the different manufacturers have a little bit of a different product, if you will, or a oh my gosh, it's my bedtime. I can't even think. A different feature. And so it's difficult to if you have a phonak hearing aid, you know, in theory, you got to go with all the phonak products. And if you have an Oticon, you have to go with the Oticons. And so it makes it challenging to cross manufacturers, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I do think though, if you lay a Connect clip or an Edge-a-mic flat, you're going to be a little bit more omnidirectional than if you wear it vertically. Could try it if that's really not doing the trick. We can talk about getting the Roger Select and finding a way to pair it with the Oticon hearing aids, because that's also doable.
Oh, is that
Okay.
that's good to know.
I mean, you might need a neck
Yeah, I
loop.
didn't know that either.
You would need a neck loop, I think, but it should be possible.
Yeah,
Mm.
but the middle school students that I work with are not going to wear a neck loop.
No, we actually tried the neck loop in
Yep.
first grade, and that was a no-go for us as well.
Yep, not gonna happen. Definitely.
But that's
But
good to know
it's
that
worth
the
a try.
Roger can pair.
It's
Yeah,
worth a
and it's good
try.
to know that the Roger can pair to the Oticon. But no, I just was curious just to see if that was a thing.
And that
Yeah.
new technology is coming out all the time.
Oh,
I
and then
think
I
that's the
actually
next
do have
meeting
one-
topic.
I
Sorry.
do have one more question. I'm sorry. Just to backtrack, for the sound speakers in the classroom, would you say better than the FM in the classroom, or does it depend on that hearing loss? Because in middle school, we walked into the classroom and we brought up, well, our son would be coming in with his Edu-mic. He's like, oh, okay, well, that's great. We have this Soundfield too. We use that. I'm like, well, we want you to kind of use this as well. And then our son was kind of curious about the Soundfield, but as you know, he has bilateral hearing loss. So I don't know if that would be beneficial or not, just using that or an option. Is there one better than the other, or do they both work the same, or does it depend on the hearing loss?
Well, personal FM is generally thought to be better than Soundfield for a
Right.
hearing impaired student. It is possible to use both, but he would just have to try that and see if it's,
Okay.
distracting. Like, for example, if the one signal is getting even just a couple of milliseconds to his ears at a different time than the other signal, it's going to make it worse
Yeah.
instead of better. But it might be fine. They might work he might succeed in using the personal and Soundfield systems simultaneously. But if you had to pick either or, the personal is, the
Mhm.
data has shown that tends to give the best outcome.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, personal is better acoustically or hearing wise, the access wise, but then you get back to the Soundfield is less obvious. And it looks like it could be used for everybody in the classroom. So
Right.
it's kind of a what I find is it's a oh, what's the word? I can't even think of it. You have to weigh what does the kid prefer more? Do they prefer be less, they don't want to be called out or singled out? Is that more valuable to them than hearing, having that auditory access? or what. So it's, it's a decision. It's a decision. It's a thing they have to weigh. I can't even
Yeah,
talk.
weigh the pros and cons, and at that age especially,
Yes. Yeah.
it's probably gonna end up being his call, I would
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
So I understood that Soundfields, anything greater than a mild loss, were not the piece of equipment for support. Is
But
that
it's way better than not having FM. So like if you have a child that refuses to wear personal, Soundfield's much better than nothing. And it only depends on the hearing loss to an extent. Like if the kid is right in front of the Soundfield speaker and they're getting a good signal to noise ratio, they're going to do fine no matter what the hearing loss is. As long as they have access and that signal to noise ratio is being made, really beneficial for them, it's okay. But yeah, like as far like audiologists around the world will always say personal over Soundfield until you get a kid that's like, I'm not walking around with that microphone.
Yeah, I have a middle school student who is in the gifted program, and she does not want a personal Edge-a-mic. She doesn't want a personal system. And so we purchased 7 Red Cats because she did not want to take the microphone. She didn't want to take the Edge-a-mic from teacher to teacher. And so yeah, it becomes their preference. And I want them to have access. And so whatever their preference is, then that's what we work with, because they're the owners. It's their hearing loss. They have that ownership of it.
It's very accommodating of your school. That's great.
That's my job.
Thank you.
All right, well, I think we only have a few more minutes with our interpreters, so I want to say thank you to Shanda and Bernadette. We really appreciate this. It was great information. Thank you to our interpreters and to everybody who joined. I think both put their contact information in the chat, and I'm going to share the video, so if anybody needs to go over the information, I will have that available. And yeah, thank you. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Night.